Hi friends, today we are going to discuss the topic English drama in the Neoclassical Age. The Neoclassical Age can be divided broadly in three periods. The first one is the Restoration Age, which lasted from 1660 to 1700, that is the Age of Dryden. The second one is from 1700 to 1740, which is often known as the Age of Pope. And the third one is from 1741 to 1798, the Age of Johnson. The first half of the 18th century is also known as the Augustan Age in the history of English literature. It must be kept in view, however, that these divisions are not rigid and are assumed on the basis of the general features of the literature under discussion today. We shall focus today primarily on the drama of the 18th century, that is, the second and the third periods of the neoclassical influence. At the outset, the term neoclassical itself requires a little bit of explanation. The vogue began in England after it was adopted by the French in the 17th and the 18th century. Cardinal Richelieu of France in the 17th century wanted to make France the hub of cultural activities in Europe. He believed that inspiration could be had from Italy, which had been stimulated by the ancient Greek and Roman literature and began the movement known as the Renaissance. Since the scholars reiterated the classical rules set by the ancient classical writers like Aristotle and Horace, the creed following these doctrines was called Neoclassicism. The impact of the classical regime is, not regime, let us call it regimen. It is apparent more fully in the works of two French dramatists. They were Cardinal and Racine in the 17th and the 18th century. The word neo means new. In England, the contemporary major English critics and poets like Dryden, Pope, and Addison, also Johnson, displayed a strong affiliation to the classical tenets. The neoclassical tenets advocated basically two ideas. The first one was the ideal of decorum, and the second one was the ideal of verisimilitude. The ideal of decorum, prescribed by the ancient Roman writer Horace in his Ars Poetica, consists in a prescribed behavior for every member of society. A character in a play hence should behave in a manner befitting his station in society. For instance, a character representing a king must act as a king, a servant should act like a servant, and a woman should act like a woman. The second ideal, that is the ideal of verisimilitude, we must understand first that the meaning of verisimilitude is the appearance of being real or true. And since ghosts and apparitions were not real, the supernatural was generally shunned from the stage. This ideal also dictated the unities of time, place, and action. The 15th century Italian writer Cardinal was the first to use these unities in his blank verse tragedy. Unity of time implies that the action shown on the stage during a play should present events that occur within 24 hours. Utility of place infers that the action represented should happen at one physical location. Unity of action means that the play should have only one storyline. That is, it should have simple plot. Although French literature influenced English literature a great deal, ironically, the rules of the unities were not always followed by the British dramatists in the neoclassical period also. Another assumption of neoclassicism was that a play must have poetic justice, that is, at the end, the good should be rewarded and bad should be punished. The neoclassicists believed that the objective of drama is to infuse morality in society and therefore it must impart moral lessons. John Dennis, a neoclassical dramatist, considered the stage an instrument for reforming manners and condemning the decadence of Restoration comedy. In an essay on the opera, which he wrote in 1706, he attacked the Italian opera, which he considered aesthetically immoral and extremely corrupt. Two significant developments took place in English drama in the first 50 years of the 18th century. The first was the introduction of moral reforms in comedies. The second was the improvement in the quality of the playhouse managers. While in the reign of Charles II, the theatres were managed generally by courtiers, in the 18th century management passed into the hands of professionals. At the start of the century, there were two major theatres. One was the Drury Lane Theatre and the other was the Covent Garden. The authors in the Restoration age belonged to the aristocratic classes, but in the 18th century, the role of the authors seems to have been denuded. The theatre managers preferred playwrights who would easily compromise the quality of drama to appease the actors and managers. They wrote for money, not for merit. More informed writers like Susanna St. Cleaver and Henry Fielding often complained of the whims of the audience, the managers, and the actors. It resulted in a lot of confusion, and the quality of drama suffered terribly. There were principally three kinds of drama in 18th century England. The first was rewritings of Elizabethan or French plays. The second one was the comedy of manners. The third one was the heroic drama. Heroic drama included sentimental comedies and sentimental tragedies. A later development was the anti-sentimental comedy, which appeared in reaction to sentimental comedy. There were other minor genres too, like the farce and the historical drama. The genre of Restoration comedy was still a favorite with the spectators. Farquhar's The Recruiting Officer in 1706 and The Beau's Stratagem in 1707 and Congreve's The Way of the World in 1700, a bit earlier, drew huge audiences. The sentimental comedy appeared as a reaction to the vulgarity and licentiousness of the comedy of manners in the Restoration age. The setting of the sentimental drama was usually a middle-class environment, and the main characters were shown to suffer terribly while struggling to maintain their virtuousness. Laughter and hilarity were driven away from the sentimental genre. Pathos and moralizing abounded. The scenes were written to produce tears instead of mirth. It was too serious and almost unreal. Its rationale was provided by the benevolent view of human nature supplied by Hobbes and Lord Shaftesbury, who extended the sentimental view of man. Cibber can be credited with the serious beginnings of sentimental drama. He was an actor as well as playwright. His first sentimental play was Love's Last Shift, that was produced in the closing years of the 17th century in 1696. Ironically, the wit part in his comedies was weak, and his plays were thus mostly sitcoms or situational comedies. One of his pet tricks in comedies was the sudden reformation of an erring gentleman. It happens in his 18th century plays like The Careless Husband that came out in 1704 also. Another of its pioneers was Richard Steele. His most notable sentimental comedy was The Conscious Lovers, which was produced in 1722. Other such comedies, which we may call reformed comedies, are James Miller's The Man of Taste in 1735 and Edward Moore's The Foundling in 1748. However, the playwrights of the age were faced with a critical dilemma. Since it was an age of moral correction and prudery, it was hard to find respectable follies of men that could be made fun of. In fact, Miller, one such playwright, has written in the preface to his work that it was a work meant to, I quote, entertain the town without giving offense either to virtue, decency, or good manners. The Beggar's Opera in 1728 by John Gay was half farce and half political propaganda. There were such biting political farces, especially by Henry Fielding, that the Parliament passed the Licensing Act in 1737 to introduce debilitating censorship. Fielding condemned the high life of London in The Modern Husband in 1732 and The Universal Gallant in 1735. Another writer of farces was Henry Carey, whose most citable work is The Contrivances, which was produced in 1715. The plays by Susanna St. Cleaver and Henry Fielding do not depend too much on sentimentalism. In fact, her play, The Gamester, she uses intrigue in it, and intrigue is much stronger than the element of sentimentalism. Even stronger wit is visible in A Bold Stroke for a Wife. The tragedies produced in this period were passionate but rigged with too much sentimentality. The details of middle-class life were rather flat, and the declamation, a rhetoric device used by most of the tragedy writers, sounded quite artificial. The stage setting was generally gloomy. Nicholas Rowe and Addison were the better tragedy writers. Rowe's plays often focused on the distress of a lady, as in Jane Shore and Lady Jane Grey. The first one came in 1714, the second one in 1715. A striking feature of his tragedies is that these had mostly domestic themes and were exceedingly sentimental. Addison's Cato in 1713 is in the style of Franco-Roman drama. Some critics consider Cato to be the acme or the highest point of English neoclassical tragedy. Apart from Franco-Roman sources, the playwrights also used Oriental tales and medieval English history. Notable tragedies are The Revenge in 1721 by Edward Young and The Briton in 1722 by Ambrose Philip. A wave of change came with George Lillo's tragedies that challenged the moral overtones of the neoclassical tragedy. His hero, in The London Merchant, produced in 1731, is a member of the middle class, and eventually he turns out to be the murderer of his own benefactor. His other tragedy, Fatal Curiosity, too is a family tragedy and discards the idea of a great tragic hero. His drama clearly shows that drama was in search of novelties and that it was headed for a certain change. In 1741, Garrick appeared on the throne of English, not on the throne, rather, on the horizon of English drama and transformed the entire milieu. Along with Sir John St. John Kemble, he was one of the first theatre celebrities in Europe. Already in 1732, John Rich one of Cibber's rivals, had taken his drama company to new premises, which was known as Covent Garden. It was also a period when a new kind of drama, the anti-sentimental comedy, rose in reaction to sentimental comedy in the manner Lillo had departed from the ideals of sentimental tragedy. The anti-sentimental comedy, too, was a direct response to the excesses of the sentimental comedy. The farce was definitely a kind of precursor, and a few minor dramatists were already producing comedies relying not on tears but on wit and humor. The foremost among these was Arthur Murphy, who produced around a dozen comedies between 1756 and 1777. His best work was 3 Weeks After Marriage, written and produced in 1776. Although Coleman, Hugh Kelly, and Richard Cumberland continued the legacy of sentimentalism, the tide was gradually but definitely turning. Garrick commented wryly once on sentimental drama that the playhouse was almost a temple of virtue and that the theatres needed only a steeple to bring them on par with the churches. Two playwrights most hostile to the sentimental comedy were Richard Sheridan and Oliver Goldsmith. Yet Garrick was so angry when Goldsmith wrote his essay, Inquiry into the Present State of Polite Learning in Europe, that he declined to stage his plays. Goldsmith's essay that made a bitter attack on sentimental comedy was actually the 1772 essay. It was titled A Comparison Between Laughing and Sentimental Comedy, and it tried to prove that the sentimental comedies lacked vis comica, or the comic force. He emphasized the point that even in the view of Aristotle and Terence, the ancients, comedy should expose vices through satire, and that it is not meant to represent human distress. He wrote, and I quote, "A new species of dramatic composition has been introduced under the name of sentimental comedy, in which the virtue of private life are exhibited rather than the vices exposed, and the distresses rather than the faults of mankind make our interest in the pieces." Unquote. The essay was written before the publication and production of She Stoops to Conquer in 1773. He had already started his campaign against sentimental comedy in the preface to his play The Good-Natured Man, which was produced in 1768. Interestingly, he used the devices of the sentimental comedy itself to ridicule it. Its title sounds sentimental, the hero is sentimental, the structure follows the framework of sentimental drama. However, his treatment makes it almost purely anti-sentimental. Goldsmith clinched the issue in his second play, She Stoops to Conquer. His achievements in the anti-sentimental drama were sparkling wit, laughter-evoking dialogues, disguise, extremely gripping humorous situations, as well as a depiction of low characters. He employed romantic comedy, soft mockery of the stupidities and faults, funny farce, conventions of the comedy of manners, and a speck or a smidgen of sentimentalism. Dr. Johnson liked it immensely. He wrote, and I quote again, "I know of no comedy for many years that has so much exhilarated an audience." Unquote. The prologue to the drama laments that comic muses dying would not be revived until the audience accepts the medicine of laughter in 5 doses, that is, the 5 acts of the play. The other writer, Sheridan, he also was hostile to sentimental comedy. He derived his material from Georgian comedies in his castigation of the sentimental or weeping comedy. His first extremely successful comedy was The Rivals, something of a burlesque. It ridicules the sentimental tradition not only in drama but also in popular romantic fiction. The intrigue in the play is well handled, yet the first stage performance on 17th January 1775 was received in a bit lukewarm manner. Later on it became very popular, but its fame rests primarily on the character Mrs. Malaprop, whose hilarious Mrs. speech is a matter of mirthful delight. Like when she talks about the pineapple of politeness instead of pinnacle of politeness. Sheridan's The School for Scandal is an acknowledged masterpiece in the anti-sentimental comedy genre. It was published in 1777. It contains grace, dignity, and sparkling wit. It would be a mistake to believe that the anti-sentimental drama of Oliver Goldsmith and Sheridan brought a pause to the sentimental drama. Although it was on the decline, the audience still patronized it in the form of melodrama. It appeared in different garbs, like the humanitarian purpose of Thomas Holcroft and Mrs. Elizabeth Inchbald, in plays like In Such Things Are, which was produced in 1787. Yes, the name of the play was In Such Things Are. On the whole, the journey of English drama in the neoclassical age was a definite shift from licentiousness to theory, moral overtones at first, and then to dazzling wit. Yet, undeniably, it was on the way down, as the novel and poetry overwhelmed it much too profusely. By the end of the 18th century, its authorial and performative quality had descended into a prolonged eclipse, and it was not revived until the close of the 19th century. Bye.